Hello friends, welcome to UGC EPG Pathshala. Myself Dr. Chandri Banerjee, Assistant Professor in the Department of Geography, BSR Government Arts College, Alwar, Rajasthan. Today I shall speak on positivism, which is part of the paper Geographical Thought. This study has been proceeded keeping in mind the following objectives. First and foremost, it is essential to have an understanding regarding the doctrine of positivism. Hence, it forms the first objective of the study. Secondly, it is essential to find out what were the positivist methods that were used in the discipline of geography. And finally, it is essential to present a critical analysis of this doctrine of positivism as well. Coming to the concept of positivism, the origin of positivism as a well-established philosophy can be accredited to the French philosopher Auguste Comte in the 1830s. Positivism as a philosophy was mainly initiated as a polemical instrument against the romantic and speculative tradition that prevailed prior to the French Revolution. Its main purpose was to distinguish science from metaphysics and religion. Thus, positivism may be precisely described as a philosophical movement that emphasized on science and scientific method as the only source of knowledge and which stood in sharp contrast to religion and metaphysics. Comte rejected metaphysics for its abstract nature with no grounding in reality and for being more concerned with the emotional than the practical questions. He sought for some sort of sociocracy that was dominated by the scientists for the unity and progress of the entire humanity. Since a lot of social disorder was created following the French Revolution, Comte attempted to establish positivist philosophy as an organizational tool that would lead the society through an organized development. This was much against the metaphysical principle that sought to change society through utopian solutions to the existing situations. Therefore, Comte argued that philosophy was an immature science and that metaphysics should be replaced scientifically through an outlook that was essentially positive in nature. Auguste Comte delivered lectures on positivist philosophy, which was published as a book with the title The Course of Positivist Philosophy. His positivist philosophy included 5 basic guidelines. First, all scientific knowledge was to be based on direct and empirically verifiable experience of reality. This was supposed to provide an edge over the theoretical conjectures. Scientific methods, he asserted, should combine both reason and experience. The reason to formulate the hypothesis and experience to do away with the falsifications. Thirdly, there should be a unified scientific method or la certitude that is acceptable to all the sciences. This implied that all the different branches of knowledge were distinguished by the subject matter, or rather the object of study, and the methods they used should be common. In other words, the branches of knowledge that differed from each other should be studied on the basis of how they studied, but rather on the basis of what they studied. This was possible only when there was la precise or a common objective of formulating scientific theories that could be subject to empirical testing and utilized for proposing universal laws. This meant that ethical based value judgments, which included beliefs, customs, norms, etc., were not to be considered as part of the scientific knowledge, since they were not based on direct observations and thus were not capable of empirical verifications. The empirically verifiable theories so developed then should be based on the tenet of la utile, meaning that it should have some utility and must serve as an instrument of social modification or engineering. Finally, the positivist philosophy was supposed to follow the doctrine of la relative, which implied that scientific knowledge was never complete but rather relative and kept on progressing with time through the unification of the scientific theories, which increased human awareness about the social arrangements. And this awareness in turn required more inclusive theories. The philosophy of positivism challenged several taboos and religious beliefs that existed against empirical investigations, and the above postulates provided some sort of transition from the immediate through the unitary to the universal. In the opinion of Comte, the development of society is supposed to take place in three stages. The first is theological, when everything is described as God's will. Secondly is metaphysical, and thirdly it's positive, when attempts are made to find out some sort of causality between the observed phenomena. Comte advocated that it is true that the social phenomena are more complex than the natural phenomena, yet there should be a science of social relationships that needs to be developed as parallel to and in the same principles as the natural sciences. The purpose of such social sciences would be to explore the laws governing human society through the scientific investigation of social communities. These ideas of Comte was much in tune with the proposition of John Locke that knowledge could only be derived through direct observations of actual situations, and whatever was not supported by empirical facts could not be considered as knowledge. In a nutshell, the basic tenets of positivism may be described as: positivism can be said to be empiricism as well, which is derived from the Greek word empire, that means experience, since it promoted science and scientific methods as a source of knowledge. It averred that science only dealt with the empirical questions that were based on experiences of real conditions as they exist, and that which could be tested through experiments or some other measures. Positivism enabled to discover the causal connections between the facts to arrive into some conclusions that were supposed to be value-free, unbiased and unprejudiced. The positivist philosophy proved to be anti-idealistic, that is, it stood in contrast to anything that was abstract and a mental construct. Therefore, positivism did not deal with the normative questions, that is, related to the norms or values, as they could not be tested empirically and established with scientific evidence. Positivism, for this reason, rejected metaphysics as being unscientific. Since positivism declared anything as unscientific and abstract until it could be verified with empirical evidence and tested through experiments, it did not accept authority just because it was declared as an authority. This brought positivism in conflict with the Nazi movement in Germany, as it was contemporary to the growth of positivism, and the philosophy was branded as anti-authoritarian, and positivism came to be used as an abusive term. In the 1920s, positivism witnessed some sort of deviation from the classical Comtean ideas when a group of scientists created their Vienna Circle and identified themselves as the logical positivists. German philosopher and physicist Maurice Schlick was the founder of this group, which also had another German philosopher, Rudolf Carnap, as a prominent member. They upheld, that is, the logical positivists upheld the viewpoint that some knowledge could also be gained without relying on experience through formal logic and pure mathematics. Hence, they distinguished between analytical statements which were a priori propositions whose truth could be verified through tautologies, and those were essentially the domain of the formal sciences like logic and mathematics. And along with this, there were synthetic statements that were supposed to be established empirically through hypothesis testing, which in turn supported the analytical statements. Hence, logical positivism offered a much more authentic basis for scientific investigation. The essence of logical positivism was acquiring knowledge through a combination of both experience and analysis, and using such knowledge to alter phenomena so as to yield a desired outcome. This philosophy included three interrelated precepts: scientism, which meant that the positivist methods alone were the methods of acquiring knowledge. Secondly, the scientific policies, which implied that only positivism was the key to social modification or engineering, as it provided rational solutions to all social problems. And thirdly, freedom from values, which implied that scientific judgments derived through positive methods were neutral, unbiased, and objective, and hence were free from any moral or political binders. Having discussed the concept of positivism, it is essential now to see how this concept was used in the field or the subject of geography. There was a great deal of efforts in the latter half of the 19th century to develop the discipline of geography as a nomothetic science. This was largely the impact of the Darwinian tradition that invigorated the scientists to search for the governing laws of nature, and in the same tune the social scientists to explore the laws determining the social arrangements. The hypothetic deductive approach of study that was specially characteristic of the natural sciences replaced the inductive methods that was prevalent in the social sciences. There was an effort to accommodate social sciences within the framework of positivism. It is essential here to note that the geographical developments that took place in the 1950s and the 1960s were mainly committed to logical positivism in the true sense and not into the Comtean positivism. The researchers sought to develop a priori models about reality for which they devised a set of hypotheses that were to be authenticated, validated or discarded through testing of empirical data. Once verified, they were validated as laws until their eventual refutation through further research. The logical positivists conceived that some order persists in the objective world that needs to be explored and discovered through scientific investigation, which gave rise to the spatial patterns of variation in geography, and these patterns were supposed to be untouched, or these patterns could not be manipulated by the observer. Geography soon became positivist-led. The hypothetic deductive approach led the discipline, particularly the human geography, to develop as a model building and theoretical science, since it dealt with phenomena that were familiar with reality both spatially and temporally. During the 1950s and 1960s, the essence and purpose of Anglo-American geography witnessed a drastic transformation with the replacement of the ideographic approach that focused on areal differentiation with the adoption of the nomothetic methods that sought to explore models of spatial structure. This change was initiated by Schaeffer with his critique of Kant's exceptionalist views that placed history and geography as exceptional subjects and different from the other systematic sciences. Schaeffer put forward his spatial organization paradigm and conceived geography as a spatial and social science primarily concerned with the formulation of laws that governs the spatial distribution of any phenomenon as they are found on the Earth's surface. Hence, what Schaeffer did was to set off a sort of revolution in geography that was basically theoretical and quantitative in nature. This revolution in geography sought to provide the discipline a scientific approach with the application of mathematical and statistical methodologies. It largely accepted the tenets of positivism, of unified scientific methods that was acceptable to all the sciences, be it natural or human. The quantitative schools undertook to construct models and theoretical structures within which geographical realities were supposed to be incorporated. The quantitative revolution that geography underwent by adopting the viewpoints of positivism was set off mainly by the mathematicians, and it was largely an outcome of the impact of the non-geographers on geography. And this was evident in many other disciplines as well, where the already existing knowledge was altered with a mathematical approach. William Bunge, in his theoretical geography that was published in 1962, went as far as to describe geography as a science of spatial relations and geometry as a mathematics of space. So logically, geometry was treated as a language of geography. And what followed was the development of the concept of space as a basic organizing concept of the subject matter of geography. Two major approaches thereafter were identified in the study of geography. The first is the spatial analysis, which referred to the application of quantitative or more specifically statistical methods and techniques in locational analysis. And secondly, it's a spatial science, which was a concept which was largely close to the positivist philosophy and presented human geography as a social science with its prime focus on space as a guiding principle behind organizing and operating the society and controlling human behavior. These two approaches, which were related to space, led to the development of the following two aspects of space that became the central thesis of geography. First, it was a spatial interaction which referred to the interdependence between spatial units and the interaction between humans and environment within a particular area. And secondly, it was a spatial structure which referred to the spatial arrangements, or more precisely the geometric pattern of any phenomena on the Earth's surface, because geometry was considered as a language of geography. Inspired by positivist thinking, major advances towards a unified methodological and philosophical basis of the quantitative schools was rendered by famous geographers like Peter Haggett, Richard Chorley, and David Harvey in the 1960s. The discipline of geography witnessed a major theoretical and methodological development. A new domain of knowledge, in fact, emerged that came to be known as regional science, that was basically an amalgam of geography, economics, and planning, with its main concern for regional problems, with a solution for regional problems. The pioneer for this new discipline was Walter Izard. The most important theoretical development that fundamentally incorporated the philosophy of positivism was the location analysis of Peter Haggett that was put forward by him in the book Locational Analysis in Human Geography in 1965. This approach in human geography, that was more popularly termed as spatial science, concerned itself, following the geometric tradition, with the spatial arrangements of phenomena on the Earth's surface. In addition to this, it also dealt with the interaction between places within a spatial pattern and the dynamics of such pattern, as well as the creation of alternative patterns through model building that was to provide a better possibility. The central place theory that was postulated by Auguste Losch, the gravity model by Stewart and Warnes, or the diffusion theory of Hagerstrand were all formulated using locational analysis. Another concept that was intrinsically associated with positivism was the concept of systems. A system may be defined as an array of entities that have specific relationship among them as well as with their environment. Richard J. Chorley was the first geographer to introduce general systems theory in geography. His paper, Geomorphology and General Systems Theory, published in 1962, was developed within the framework of the systems approach, in which he tried to apply the concept of open and closed systems to geomorphology. A major contribution to the positivist theory was made by David Harvey in his Explanation in Geography, in which he opined that reality is a set of complex phenomena, particularly so far as the relationship between the phenomena are concerned. However, it is possible to decipher such complexities with the help of system analysis, which explores the structure and function of a system. And it's important here to mention that each system was conceived to be composed of three fundamental aspects: structure, function, and development. The structure of the system was the set of elements with which it was comprised of and the relationship between them. Function of the system meant the exchange or the flow between these elements, while development meant the changes in the structure and function of the system over time. Since geography studied the relationship between humans and the environment, systems analysis was supposed to have a wide range of applications, especially in human geography. This was because the systems analysis was based on an implicit assumption of positivist philosophy that drew analogies between human societies on one hand and natural phenomena on the other. Such analogy led to the model and analog theory, the development of model and analog theory that was supposed to have a close connection with positivism. A model was basically a structured conceptualization of reality that represents particular attributes of reality, whereas analog theory is a formal theory related to building of models. Hence, a model or an analog may range from a structured idea to a hypothesis, to a law, and to a theory. Following the positivist outlook, a model may be used as a guide to validate a set of hypotheses through empirical testing to establish a theory. Since a model was considered to contain some resemblances with the reality. Though model building may have been used in many sciences since long, but its use in geography was of comparatively a recent origin and may be attributed to the positivism. However, positivism was not free from criticism, and the positivist philosophy that rejected metaphysics and provided a sound philosophical, methodological, and scientific basis to the discipline of geography was itself subject to several criticisms. Knowledge based on the observations of the real situations that could be easily verified empirically was highly objective, unbiased, and unprejudiced, as it was opined in the views of the positivist thinkers, and they could be readily utilized for the formulation of universal laws and theories. Positivism encouraged the use of statistical and mathematical techniques that provided precision to research and enabled to analyze a geographical system in a much more simplified form. It provided a kind of framework within which the theoretical statements could be formally presented. However, the critique of positivism has been highly intense and convincing. Positivism has been mainly criticized on three fronts. First is empiricism. Since positivism recognized the fact that theory building was essentially based on the direct observation of reality, which could be subject to statistical procedures for empirical verification. But this approach proved to be very superficial, against which new philosophical and theoretical frameworks were designed, and that used alternative methods than statistical techniques. These philosophies, like realism and structuralism, offered a much more insightful exposure of human society. In contrast to positivism that concerned itself with how, they were concerned with why, and went beyond the positivist argument to discover the processes that creates a particular pattern of physical or social regularity. The second point or front of criticism against positivism was its exclusive nature. The positivists claimed that the methods of natural sciences could be extended into the domain of the social sciences, including humanities. To establish a unified scientific method was criticized. Positivism excluded the normative questions like values, beliefs, emotions, attitudes, and so on. But in reality, much of human behavior and social arrangements is guided by such questions. Hence, it provided a very parochial approach to the study of any domain of social sciences. Thirdly, the autonomous nature of the positivist philosophy has also been subject to criticism. The assertion of positivism that knowledge is based on direct observation and could be verified empirically to yield a scientific discourse that was thought to be objective, neutral, and unprejudiced was widely challenged. Among the social sciences, human geography was the one to adopt the positivist doctrine in a great way, as it provided a systematic and scientific approach to the discipline, and where phenomena could be verified. The new paradigm was widely accepted, particularly in the fields of urban and economic geography within human geography. Schaeffer's paper on exceptionalism that he presented as a critique to Kant's viewpoints opened the door to the domain of logical positivism. The geography that developed by adopting the positivist doctrine, emphasizing on analyzing spatial data and developing spatial theory based on empirically tested mathematical models, were greatly scientific and precise. However, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was increasing dissatisfaction among the geographers with overemphasis on spatial views, and they sought to explore alternative approaches to geographical problems. They argued that human geography employing the spatial view was actually a sort of fetishism that alienated, diverted, and obscured the fundamental social questions. And for this reason, even David Harvey later deviated from positivism to focus on the question of social distribution. The critique of positivism in geography mainly emanated from two sources. First was its acceptance of statistical techniques for making inferences about reality, and secondly, its acceptance of the assumption of the methodological unification of the sciences. Regarding the first criticism, Bennett highlighted that positivism created a false sense of objectivity. The models that were constructed using statistical techniques and were considered as an effective tool of theory building was actually a deviation for the observer from the observed, as it gave more prominence to some elements and undermined the others. This in turn paved the way for controlling and manipulating the society, and they were considered grossly inadequate for geographical inquiry. By employing quantitative techniques, positivism largely eliminated the social and humanistic concerns and reduced humankind as decision makers or workers to mere passive agents. Such models mostly turned out to be the result of what can be called economic determinism. Positivism described the existing real situation and thus encouraged some sort of status quo in society, especially with respect to the distribution of social well-being. Since it excluded the normative questions, thus it deprived human society of the norms and values based on which it should have been organized. With its over-enthusiasm with empirical questions, in fact, sometimes it overlooked many good qualitative statements that would have otherwise proved to be effective in describing the regional entities. Positivism attempted to construct theories with universal acceptability by moving from particular to the general, which had reduced validity in real world owing to the spatial character of the geographical data, and it resulted in overgeneralization. Availability of an extensive and reliable database was considered as an important prerequisite for the application of statistical techniques in human geography, and in the absence of the models or theories, it's very difficult to develop models or theories in the absence of such data. And non-reliable data mainly gave rise to the erroneous pictures of reality. Regarding the second criticism, some geographers like Peat or Slater derided the positivist spatial science tradition in geography and even challenged its methodological base as a whole. Their rejection of positivism implied a rejection of the concept of space and hence the rejection of the concept of the entire subject of geography. They argued that spatial science with geometry as its language was not adequate for addressing geographical problems. Though space was regarded as a central theme of the subject, yet the discipline could not be distinguished from the others solely on that ground. The concept of space merely reduced geography to a heterogeneous amalgam of spatial models that yielded no process of understanding or specific theoretical object to geography. The separate development of physical and human geography also eroded the possibility regarding the unification of the subject, and in most situations human geographers minimized the role of the environment while physical geographers sought to develop theories that were detached from human and social needs. The critic of positivism revived the social foundations and responsibilities of social sciences, due to which geography later on went through another revolution that was critical of positivist philosophy, and this was essentially humanistic in approach and was thus termed critical revolution. Thank you.